In this contemporary mythological episode, I want to talk about probability fields and the role of the individual in community. So what we have in our cultural mythology is the myth of the individual. The myth of the individual is defined by things such as the self-made man or woman, by no one's going to tell me what to do. I'm my own person, my own man, my own woman. And the idea is that it's all up to the individual, and that the most sacred value in the cosmological order in the mythology is the individual freedom to do whatever the individual feels like, however absurd. And so this is the kind of the paradigm of the individual. Now, this liberates us from old constellations, meaning, from things such as the dogma of the Catholic Church or whatever it might be, the way things have been done before. So this pivot towards the individual liberates us from old structures, but it also limits us to the very small probability field of a single individual acting on an individual level. Now, the mythology that I want to first look at is the mythology of the couple. And whenever two or more individuals or energies are present, the probability field expands. Because when you bring two variables together, it tends to be, or it potentially is, a multiplier as opposed to simply addition. So if you take person A and person B and give person A a value of 10. Now, why 10? Well, person A might be a great chef in areas that person B is not. Person A may be able to listen to something in such a way that they not only help person B get conscious of what's going on inside their mind, but see it in a new angle, while at the same time person B is communicating on a dimension that does not exist on person A's radar. What do I mean by that? Well, person B is talking in terms of mathematics, which person A isn't particularly focused on, and person A is talking in the language of dreams. Person A brings up a question that person B doesn't ask themselves typically, such as, what did you dream and why? And so when you have these multiple dimensions, multiple facets of an individual, and two people come together, it's not just 10 plus 10 is 20. It's often 10 times 10 is 100. So you've got this geometric possibility. Now, what we're looking for is leverage, and we're looking for a large probability field that can be harnessed to create more well-being per unit of energy expended than can be created by an individual alone. Now, if we look at things like a couple geometrically, you can see that two people can lean towards each other at a 45-degree angle. They can lean back, or they can lean forward and press hands, or they can do different forms of dance or acro yoga. What you can see is that the body's potential, when two people are involved, is an exponential increase. Meaning you have a flat floor and you have, yoga and what one person can do, and you bring in another person. And I'm using physiological metaphors to point to something that in our culture is a little bit harder to communicate because we're looking primarily through a materialistic paradigm. And so if you understand, though, that physicality is a denser version of many of the same principles that happen mentally and emotionally, meaning, they've got to be dealing with the same types of principles, because we're only conscious of human thought and feeling because of biology, which is physical. But when you imagine going off into the future and say, well, would I like to be wearing this coat or this coat in this setting? That's a much denser version of what you will experience a few hours later based on the decision, based on the imagination. So the imagination is a lighter version, and it may not be a pleasant picture. You think, if I wear this, I'll probably look fat. If I wear this, I might be cold. None of those are pleasant thoughts, and then you make a decision between, based on whether bothers you more to look fat or be cold. They're not pleasant, but it's a very light version of unpleasantness because you're experiencing the reality imaginatively. And then when you make your choice, you're experiencing at a denser level. So we're talking very much about the same patterns. It's just they're less dense when they're mental, they're less dense when emotional. And because we don't tend to, we say things like just imagination as a derogatory term, as a way to diminish the reality of something. So it's helpful to understand. The way I look at it is that you've just got different octaves. The physical is a very low, dense octave, and then you've got the same notes basically happening, at higher octave emotionally and a much higher octave energetically. And at some point they become preconceptual, where they're vibrating there, but they haven't yet taken a thought. They haven't entered the paradigm of the human energy. And this makes sense when we realize nothing that we can do as human beings can possibly separate us from the probability field, from the ecology of which we are a part. We are part of the universe, part of the multiverse, relating to the rest of the universe and the multiverse. There's absolutely nothing that we can come up with that we can say has nothing to do with everything else. We like to think of ourselves as this scourge in some sense of artificially creating artificial intelligence and microchips and poisons and toxins. And yes, there's a dissonance with our natural environment. But every single one of those thoughts, the thought, let's create artificial intelligence, came out of a biological unit that was created by the universe. The earth is part, it's all in relationship. So there's no separate part where we say, that this has nothing to do with this. We are of this earth, and this earth is of this solar system and of this universe. There's nothing that can break that connection. However, in this dance of freedom, we do have a dance to dance harmoniously or more antagonistically with the rest of what we are. Now, when you look at two individuals, if you look at this triangle right here, and we're just using a crude example, but with two people, like if one person was leaning at this angle, they fall over. But if two people are both leaning at this angle, they hold each other. And so this particular potential is released by two people that is not there with one person. But this metaphor also illustrates the fragility. And the fragility of relationship is that it takes two people to say yes and one to say no. Meaning if I walk away, this person falls. If I walk away, this person falls. If this person walks away, I fall. When you choose to release or seek to release a potential that is only possible with two people, a conversation is an example. If I say, hey, how you doing? That's a reaching for a possibility that is only possible if you respond. You don't have to respond. This is the fragility of this potential. So it takes two to say yes, one to say no. And this metaphor holds true the more complicated the relationship. And so what we get is more and more options. Because we can go like this. We can have a conversation. We can make love. When you connect two people, a probability field is released that is not there with one person. And a fragility is there that is not there with one person. Because two to say yes, one to say no means that if you say, because this is just a metaphor, if you say, I'm going to leave my car at home, but we'll get to carpool at work. This is releasing to work. This is releasing a possibility field because we can have a conversation. We can be present to each other's body language. We can save gas if you pick me up. But if I lean in, and I'm waiting at the corner, and you don't show up, then I'm late for work. I don't get the conversation. The environment doesn't save any gas, etc. And I feel less significant because the reality is, if I was the first thing on your mind, you would have been there to pick me up. And you didn't. So this creates the letdown. Now this is a key part of this mythology, is to understand that as you get more and more people involved, the probability field and the potential of the dynamic expands exponentially to where you get to a point where, for example, early on the Facebook team, which has transformed much of the planet for better and for worse, there's a dozen people on the full times, just a dozen people unleashing an incredible amount of potential. But you see, at that vulnerable stage, any one of those people going AWOL, and the thing can collapse. Any one. You see, because it just takes one break. And a lot of the geometries, because what we're dealing with is geometry. So this is a simple triangle. But what if we have another person bracing here, another person bracing here, then we come out to here, then we come out to here, then we come out to here, and we come out to here, and we come out to here. And then we brace it here, and then we brace it here and here. And every single one of these lines is a person. And we're creating, we're releasing a probability field that is way bigger. Meaning, if you look at this in just purely technical terms, we've got a very interesting shape here. You've got a holding weight, you've got a lunger, you've got something that can be, spun depending on its shape. You've got a lot of different potential here that a single line does not release. A single individual cannot create anything close to this. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We've got 15 people here. And the probability field of 15 people interacting potently and powerfully towards a common shared value is incredibly powerful, and it is exponentially bigger than just 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 15, what 15 individuals can create. Now this is, of course, a potent and well-designed synergy. You can also have, 7 people working amazingly well together and one person trying to sabotage the whole thing, and then that one person destroys it. Because that's the other part of the fragility. It takes 2 to say yes, 1 to say no. See, in this structure, depending on how fragile, how vulnerable and new it is, it can take 15 to say yes and 2 to say no. Meaning that if these 2 walked away at the same time, the whole thing collapses. And there's no time to balance and deal with the leverage involved. Because, let's say this is a leveraged company. 15 people starting it, they're borrowing 80% of the money. And they absolutely need to get to cash flow profitability before the next round of funding, or the whole thing dies. And they absolutely need all 15 people hitting all cylinders, or they're not going to hit the deadline. And 2 people walk away, and there's no time to find. The whole thing collapses. The probability field collapses. And so in this mythological framework, the thing to understand about the myth is, with more people, the probability field gets bigger and bigger. Now, as the probability field gets bigger and bigger, the specific design that releases the most well-being, what we're looking at is an equation where intelligence equals units of energy invested to maximize positive impact. That's the equation. So if you've got equation A, this person needs to spend 30 hours a week, and on their own, they can create 200 units of well-being. So 30 hours invested, 200 units of well-being. That's possible with 1. Now, if the equation here is 15 people that are investing 700 hours, and they are releasing 2 million units of well-being. So we got 200 units for 1, and we got 2 million. If this thing is designed in the right way, 15 people, each spending around 30 hours a week, can release 2 million units of well-being. 200, 2 million. But only, you see, so this is the draw. This is the draw. So do you want to partner together and then share the 2 million? Or do you want to go solo and do 200? Now this is where some very interesting aspects of human psychology come into play. In Paul Allen's book about his relationship with Bill Gates, you see a number of times when Bill Gates is pushing, so together with Ballmer and Paul Allen and Bill Gates, Microsoft comes into being. And what they did together, absolutely transforming things financially, in other words, for themselves and for much of the planet. And in doing so, exponentially more units of impact. It's not always hard to say when money translates into well-being. Sometimes it gives you heart attacks. A number of people burned out at Microsoft. I worked for one of the early employees, and the hell of coding under pressure is a nightmare. But still, in the analogy, let's say that money really was well-being, which it often isn't, then you'd find the draw of being a part of an alchemical design that potentiates an individual to exponentially increase the units of dollars well-being. In our culture, it's the same thing. In fact, it's not. In fact, there are many cases where earning and creating more money in the way that it's done directly implodes well-being in the short term and sometimes the long term as well. But theoretically, that's the idea. We go for money not because we think it makes us miserable. We go for money because we think it potentiates well-being. And so so we have the draw here. But one of the interesting things comes in human nature is if on your own you'd make 200 units of well-being, and as a threesome, let's say Gates, Ballmer, and Paul Allen, they create 2 million units of well-being. But in this particular story, Gates is the greedy one. He wants to be number one. So of those 2 million, he wants 1 million and kind of leverages and pushes, and then splits the remaining 500,000 with Paul Allen and Steve Ballmer. Now in this analogy, it's human nature to feel resentful. And so Paul Allen had some of that, an awareness that Gates would push him as far as he would let him be pushed. Much like Jobs, pushed Wozniak, and it's not that Jobs did all the work. He did more of the pushing. So there's an ambitious greed element of wanting to be number one just because that's what drives certain people. But the question is, in human nature, there's a lot of people that would rather have nothing to do with an organization that was unfair. In other words, both Jobs and Gates were unfair in their proportion of credit they wanted for the hours and impact that they had. And so in that scenario, you have the 500,000 each to accommodate Gates' pushiness, basically, or whether it's Wozniak or whatever, the pushiness. And the question is, would you play along? Well, technically, if you can go from 200 units a month or a week into 2 million, or let's say 500,000, that's your kind of somewhat unfair deal. So 500,000 versus 200, what do you do? And it's an interesting equation because, of course, technically, you have 500,000 is a hell of a deal over 200. And some people that need to be pushy will walk away. So you have this pride-ego dynamic where if someone can't be number one, they may walk away, even if it's unfair. And then if someone is unfairly treated, they may walk away, even though it means their impact is plummeting from 500,000 to back to 200. I'm not going to be taken advantage of. I'm not going to be treated. I'm not going to be walked over by some bully is kind of the mindset. So that's a personality thing. And of course, rationally, if you can choose between being bullied to some extent by a dominant personality that together with you unleashes 1,000 times more of your potential, or in this case 500,000 times, it's a pretty good deal. So in other words, you can win while being unfairly treated in a group dynamic that releases your potential. And since we are surrounded by, competitive bullying type people, the question is, when and how much to play along. Now, usually the person who wants to be number one will only bully you as far as they can't replace you. So that's another thing, you can play with. You can use that metric where if they want to be number one so bad and they need you, well, then they can't bully you. But if they can, if they can get rid of you as soon as they can, and of course they're always trying to manipulate the dynamic so that they could replace you, to have a backup you, so that they can get even more. That's the greed dynamic. So you have that particular power dynamic, but what I want to talk about is the fact that geometrically and mathematically, the intelligent and moral thing is to partner and form more sophisticated and fragile organisms rather than more resilient and low potential organisms in the form of the individual. Meaning, from purely rational and intelligent point of view, advocating that we need lots of people working 30 hours a week and generating 200 units of well-being, and that the most important thing is that nobody disturb them, nobody tell them what to do, nobody interfere with their favorite color and all that, that they should be authentic thems and not care at all what anyone else says, is a world where 30 hours produces 200 units of well-being. Meanwhile, when you have these complex geometric designs that can create, literally 2 million units of well-being in a team, the moral, the intelligent, the scientific, the mathematical thing to do is to partner, which means that the organization, the group, the design, and the team is more important than the individual. And that this is the metric of intelligence. Now, the fragility, and this is a really important thing in our culture's assessment of freedom, because, in the United States, we have, this obsession with individual freedom. And if you look at, what's happening in the United States, it's, at 10 p.m. all across the country, it's potato chips, TV, beer, soda, commenting on sport, and you question how much well-being is being generated for anyone with that diet of all that freedom. And so it's the freedom to be fat, the freedom to do nothing, the freedom to sugarify the body. To what end? Where's it going? And in our country, it's going towards an epidemic of obesity. It's not, and so the question becomes: is freedom really the be and all, or is the aspiring, the sublimating, the discipline, the aspiration, the sublimating, the discipline to reach for something more, whether that's spiritual, whether that's technological, something that transcends the individual, if that isn't the more intelligent thing to do? Now, the reason this is such an important moral issue is that, for example, in the United States, if this person leaves at a key point in the life cycle of this team, for example, let's say it's a startup, and they leave, and the entire startup collapses, which happens a lot of the time, but it collapses because they left. And they left for, any number of reasons, but it gets down to personal preference. I didn't like having to find a parking place at that place. I didn't like the hours. That wasn't my ideal beauty sleep, whatever it was. And they're, their personal well-being might even go up a bit because they didn't want to release 2 million units of well-being. That's not a big deal to them, and they just really didn't want to be told what to do. But what are the ethics? And what I would suggest is that the highest probability fields are released in groups and in elegant and symmetrical design, number one. Number two, that the responsibility of an individual not to let the team, the group down, becomes more and more important the more fragile the structure and the more newly it is conceived. And so the moral, the principle is actually one of transcendence, the transcendence of personal whim, to be a part of releasing something significant that's going to potentiate the individual. And what this suggests to me, if we take the myth to the next stage of evolution, because I think we're already there, we're certainly in a startup or a group of employees or whatever in a vital system, there's a fair amount of anger that is understood if you've watched your colleagues work 100-hour weeks for the last 4 months and then you decide you're going to go off gambling for a week when it's the last week to deliver the product or the software update or whatever. I mean, there's a fair amount of rage, and we are never going to depend on that person again. That person is never going to work another company in Silicon Valley, and that kind of thing is basically also a punishing, a censoring. If you as an individual ruin this whole complex potential just for your own whim, and everyone loses so that you could be free. Sure, it felt good. We're not going to trust you again. And so you're never going to get a chance to create 2 million units of well-being because everyone's going to know you let that team down. And so there's that kind of moral awareness. But it's very interesting in relationships. See, we love money. And so if we take this paradigm then into relationships where there are couples that literally need one another to do the growth work they're doing. And if one person decides to walk away from the relationship at a key moment, let's say they both partner to conceive and have a child, and at 1 year old, one just walks away. You see, you can't do anything about that at this point. The child cannot be murdered. And the impact of a single family or a single parent child on all levels, economic, social, shame, the impact of that is going to be there. One person walks away. It takes two to say yes. One can say no and split. There is an ethical issue there. There's a trust and ethical issue. There's a probability field issue. And it's very much understood in business that if you walk away from different people at key moments, you don't get work. That's kind of the punishment for this. But what if we take it to the next level over here, where there's all kinds of individuals chaotically doing X and X with their free time. An algorithm identifies that you're getting 10 units of well-being eating your potato chips, and you're getting 5 units of well-being, and you're getting 15 units of well-being, and you're getting 1 unit of well-being, and you're getting negative 20 units, you're drunk, whatever. And you have these 60 units here. And an algorithm, going back to this artificial intelligence dynamic, what if an algorithm says, there's a moment in time right now that I'm watching and what's all going on. And the bottom line is, if you will call this person and get them to do this, and then this person makes this decision that affects this person, and then this person is able to do something for these two people because of this call, that these people will be able to get in their car and go to here. That's going to set this in motion. That'll then set this in motion. And if this is done in the next 20 minutes, 300 million units of well-being are going to be created. A traffic collapse on a bridge will not happen. People will be evacuated from a fire. The city will not burn down. Whatever it is that the algorithm assesses, and that this is the best chain of events to induce that causality. The question is, should they have the ability to say no when they cannot repay the 300 million loss? I mean, should it be an individual basis? And the other question is, would you want to know? Would you want to know if there was a chance that in the next 20 minutes, you see, because there is a chance. The reality is that if I had the field of vision of all that's in flux and in motion right now, the reality is that I could stop a suicide tonight. I just don't know who's planning on dying. And I just don't know who needs to be got into a good enough mood so that they'll call the person who's about to kill themselves. I don't know that information. You see, but the AI does. The AI does. And when the AI can assess that the person who's about to commit suicide is feeling underappreciated and has breakthrough research, and this has to go down this way, or a cure for cancer is going to be 5 years down the road, is there a moral responsibility? And just how do we relate to that? So this is the mythology that I want to leave you with here, which is the mythology of the circle, whether it's broken down into individual units of one that are all independent and nobody should influence one another, or if we should absolutely strongly influence one another to form patterns of cohesive synergy that potentiates exponential returns on investment that simply are not available as an individual. And I'll leave you with that to contemplate.